Everyone's ready? And my opponent. So in this second speech, I like to do something a bit unorthodox. I like to bring up my voting issues. Now the reason I do this is because we've already given our 2 constructive speeches. So there's no reason not to boil the round down to the biggest issues now so that my opponent has time to respond to them. The first voting issue is survival is more important than parameters. Survival is more important than parameters. Now my opponent brought up a lot of different countries that talked about how they use their parameters and they use this to better themselves. However, I'd like to first ask that you base this round on Lincoln Douglas ideas, such as following logic over the flow. So if my opponent drops a point or I drop a point, let's not lose the round based on that. Let's base the round on these voting issues, like the purpose of a voting issue. So what I'm trying to say is that while my opponent has brought up a lot of ideas of parameters that might be good for economic growth, and he had the example of SCZs under an area where economic growth has no parameters, if those SCZ zones in China are helping people survive, even though they are causing problems in the future, it's necessary now. The SCCC zones may be causing problems for survival in the future. They may be causing problems for sustainability. However, survival must come first, and therefore survival is more important. If you don't believe me on this, ask yourself this: would you chop down a forest to save your family? Because if so, you would prioritize survival over environmental protection and environmental regulations. Now you may think this is a hypothetical situation, but this happens all the time in developing countries. When people don't have places to build their farms, and their kids and families are starving, so they have to chop down entire regions of forest in order to build farms for their kids to eat. Isn't this more important than any parameter that we could place on when you should chop down a tree? My second voting issue leads from this, which is that economic growth leads to the necessities. Economic growth leads to the necessities. Now my opponent didn't really address the idea of vaccines, so we're not going to say this is a dropped argument that my opponent should lose, but it's an area we should look at, that this would definitely help 20 million kids who do not have the DTP3 vaccine, and it would save 3 million lives like it does right now. Now let's look at food. Again, I showed how the environment must be directly hurt for these people to grow more food for their people. And then water. Now my opponent brought up how essentially pollution is a big reason why these people don't have enough water. And I completely agree. But how do we solve for the pollution that's in the water now? Because the best way to solve for the problems in the water is not just by prioritizing environmental protection, but by also looking to the other half of the problem, which is that water can be naturally diseased. So how do we solve for pollution and disease in the water in these developing countries? Well, the Water Project says the best way to do it is by giving out water filters to these people in these countries. Now these water filters cost $65. They require economic growth, but it's not inherently environmental protection because it's actually reversing the natural state of the environment by purifying the water of natural disease. Thus we can see that economic growth leads to the necessity of water, food, and vaccines. My third and final voting issue is that economic growth must come first. My opponent says there's not a conflict, but there inherently is. Environmental protection costs money, and while the first part, conserving resources, may not, we still have to prioritize economic growth. We must look at producing necessities for these people.